This is the Sports and Society podcast, where we go beyond scores, statistics, and personalities to focus on issues and controversies in sports worlds. Your hosts, Jake Oakley and Jeff Montes de Oca, are sports sociologists and the authors of the book, Sports and Society, Issues and Controversies. The episodes in this podcast give you a behind-the-scenes look at the textbook with stories from our lives as scholars and athletes, as well as providing analysis of ongoing issues and controversies in contemporary sport worlds. We welcome hearing your thoughts and analysis, so please use this space to engage with us about the textbook or any of the topics we cover in this podcast. Hello and welcome to the Sports and Society podcast. This episode's a little different from the episodes in the first season because what we want to do in this episode is talk about how you can use this podcast and the ancillaries as companions to Sports and Society, the textbook. And so that's what our conversation will focus on today. We really see this episode as directed at professors who have assigned the Sports and Society textbook. So why don't we get going then? And I'll lead us off with a question, Jay. So you initially suggested we create a podcast series as a companion to the textbook. So my question to you then is, well, what made you decide, or what made you suggest we do a podcast? Where did this idea come from?
Well, I think that as I talk with my grandchildren and also just become aware of how young people are consuming information about the world, that the podcasts seem to be a perfect complement to the chapters in the book. And you know, it also would assist instructors as well as students. You know, there are instructors who may have to miss a class at some particular point, and substituting a podcast for that class and creating a discussion outline related to the podcast would be a good way for instructors to cover their class. And the podcasts also allow us to add new material that has become relevant between the time the book was published and what's going on right now. So, and we can also explain some of the difficult points in each chapter. So, this is a way for us to give our voices to the textbook in a sense and assist students and instructors. And by the way, a lot of students, learn a lot better by listening than by reading. And this will help them develop a framework that they can use to get more out of their reading in the chapter. So I thought it was a great compliment. It's not gonna cost anything for those who are using the book. So here we are.
You know, I have to admit, Jay, when I first saw your message suggesting the podcast, I kind of rolled my eyes. And the reason is I feel like there are already enough middle-aged men making podcasts out there. You know, having an opinion on everything. It seemed a bit cliche to make another podcast. But then I thought about it, you know, then I actually opened up your message and I read it and I thought about it. And one of the things that occurred to me was when I have taught this textbook before, you know, I started helping you with the revisions, I would assign, and I still do this, lectures that or talks you've given that have been recorded online for the students to watch. And I think this was especially impactful when I taught this class online, asynchronous online. Students liked hearing your voice and they liked hearing your story. And it allowed them to connect the material in the textbook to the person that actually wrote it, which is not something they get to do very often. And then another thing, and we've talked about this during the recordings of that first season where we discussed each of the episodes. This podcast will probably be more useful to some professors than to others. For instance, I'm using the textbook this semester in my sport and society class, and I've assigned the podcast as optional for the students to listen to. They can choose to listen to it. They can choose not to listen to it. And for me, that's fine because I am a sports sociologist. I am the co-writer of the textbook. I'm tenure track. And so I don't teach a whole lot of classes every semester. And I have all this time and expertise to write up my own lectures. I'm in the classroom with the students. It's very discussion oriented. And so I think that the podcast is nice as an option for the students to listen to. I also realize there are faculty who don't have my level of privilege. I mean, I have former students that teach 10 to 15 classes a term. All their classes are online, asynchronous. They're not necessarily content experts in the classes they're teaching. And it seems to me for folks in that category, this podcast could be really, really useful. And they might even make it a required that students listen to the podcast. And I know that thinking about difference in faculty and their time has always been something you've thought about with sports and society.
Right. Yeah. I think that anything that we can do as authors to take a little of the weight off the shoulders of instructors at a time when instructors are busier than ever is a positive thing. And it also, the podcast gives an interactional element to reading the textbook in a sense. If I've listened to somebody, as you just said, if I've listened to somebody talk about something and I'm reading something that they've written, I feel a little bit more in touch with that person, and I can disagree and agree. I can maybe read more critically because of that. And that's one of our goals as well.
Yeah. And one of the things I'll do this semester is get feedback from the students on the podcast. I know some of them are already listening to the episodes, and, so far it's been positive. But we're very start of the semester, so we'll see how that goes. But maybe we can talk a little bit about what might be some different ways that people use the podcast in their classes.
Yeah, I think for instructors, if you don't have the time to prepare a full lecture or to create other things for what's going on in your class, you can use the podcast if you've listened to it, while driving home, 2 days before. You can use the podcast to create some discussion questions and assign the podcast and have a framework for a discussion that complements the book and adds to some of the things that the ancillaries already provide to create a more vital learning environment in the classroom. That's one of the things. And, it provides information that's going to complement lectures and in a sense, support the instructor in kind of an indirect way. And it gives voice to the material in the textbook, which, it makes it more real for a lot of the people who are reading it. So, and the other thing is, and I've noticed this with young people, is you can listen to a podcast when you can't read because you're driving a car, you're doing mindless busy work, you're walking or running, working out. And it gives students a heads up on chapter content, or it provides a kind of a unifying framework after reading the chapter. So it fits into the lives of instructors and students in ways that a hard copy textbook don't.
Absolutely. Can you imagine like assignments that might be given based on the podcast itself?
Yeah, definitely. In fact, for those who want to increase the critical thinking aspects of their courses, what you can do is have them listen to you and I talk and pick apart anything we say, or say that it wasn't explained in enough detail, or there are exceptions, and that gives students a chance to respond to our voices, and hopefully that will carry over into the textbook itself, and it will provide students with a critical orientation that's going to help classroom discussions.
Yeah, I think that's a great suggestion. And also just additionally, it's encouraging students to be critical consumers of the media that they're listening to. It's like, yes, okay, we're authors, we're professors, but students don't go to university just to be told what to think.
Right.
And those skills, those critical thinking skills that they develop in classes, like a sports sociology class, well, they can apply that to all aspects of their lives. And so, yeah, that's just really fantastic. Maybe now we could talk about the ancillaries. Why don't we start off by just going over what's included in the ancillaries?
Yeah, for those people who have not, for those instructors who haven't gotten access to the ancillaries or use them, basically what we do in the ancillaries is provide an introduction to the online learning center, which is a really nice complement to the textbook as well. And what we provide in the ancillaries are complete topic outlines for each of the 16 chapters. So that gives instructors and students an opportunity to take a quick glance at the overall framework of the chapter. And then there's the student true and false questions, which you can do in connection with your class, or students can do it on the online learning center, where they answer 10 true false questions. And if you're doing it on the online learning center, it scores your answers. And if you're doing it in class, the instructor can do that as well. And it gives the students an opportunity to see if they've missed something within the overall framework, substantive framework of a chapter. And it'll lead to opportunities for instructors to clarify things. So that's an important thing. And there's 211 of those true false questions that we've created. And related to that are the multiple choice questions that come in a test bank. And for anyone teaching a larger course, this is a lifesaver. It's one of those things where it saves instructors time, and it saves them from doing a relatively tedious task. And there are 817 true false questions for the book. And obviously those can be revised. You can add to them, and you don't have to use them all for sure. But this is an important thing for people who are teaching large courses where you can't be assigning long essays that would take you a week and a half to read. So that's one of the things that's an important part of the teaching process when you're dealing with large courses. And then we have,
if I could just jump in there also, just for people like some of my former students that are teaching at 2, 3, 4, 5 different institutions, and you're teaching a class for the first time. It's not your subject area. It's a lot of support for people that are overworked and underpaid. And I think there's you've always had a real social justice orientation to the book, both the content of the book, but the production of the book and supporting overworked, underpaid faculty.
Yeah, and the other way to approach this is use the multiple choice questions in your class. So in other words, you ask a question, and if you have the technology in your classroom, the students answer through the technology, and then you find out if there are weak spots. And it also facilitates discussions. So, if a third of the class is missing a question, then you can talk about that content a little bit with the students before you move to the next question. So, depending on the pedagogical approach you use, there's all sorts of ways to utilize the questions generally, and that includes the essay questions, 426 of them. And those essay questions we've written to not only uh, get students in touch at a greater level of depth with the material in the chapter, but they also raise applied issues. And anybody who's teaching a course in sport management, a sociology of sport course in sport management, there's a number of sport management questions there that that can be used in your course, and it can be used in just the ways that I've explained. So, and then there's related readings. There's 103 different related readings. So if you want to complement some of the material in a particular chapter, there is, 4 to 8 readings for each chapter, and they're short. So, you can assign them along with a chapter, or if your discussions go on a chapter go uh, beyond one class session, then you might want to have the chapter assigned for the first and a couple of the readings assigned for the second. So those can be helpful. The PowerPoint slides, I have found and gotten feedback from people, 856 PowerPoint slides that basically help you provide a visual reference point for the topics that you're going to talk about in the class. And of course, you don't have to use all those slides. You can pick 5 of them and use that to frame your discussion in the class. So those are really helpful, and I've received a lot of positive feedback on those. The other thing that's similar to that are the discussion worksheets. And I found after I'd been teaching for 30 years that giving students a discussion worksheet before they read a chapter and think about it is a way for them to take notes that they will have in front of them in class, and that pushes them just enough that they will make a comment in class where they wouldn't otherwise, because they've got notes. And you're raising that question that they have notes on as a discussion point. So that's a really helpful thing. And there's only 16 of them, but once you see how the questions are phrased, sometimes you can add your own questions to it.
And that's really important right now. As we know, there's a lot of discussion about college students not reading, not being comfortable reading, which of course is why we also have the podcast at all. But giving them that guidance to read is really valuable, because if students don't improve their communication skills in a class like sports sociology, I mean, it's great to think critically about sport, but at the end of the day, most of our students are not going to be sports sociologists. They're going to get out of college and they're going to do something else. And having those communication skills research is really clear. Employers need people who have strong communication skills. And that's what we're helping them develop in our classes.
Yeah. And I think we have to be explicit about that when we talk to our students, because, a lot of students, when they enter college, think, I've got to do something to start my career here, and I've got to do career relevant kinds of learning. and they immediately tune out certain things related to the humanities and some of the social sciences. And I think that sociology in particular can provide frameworks for understanding the world, social relationships, organizations, social structures that are invaluable in any kind of a career. So, all of these ancillaries are related to that approach. And, the last thing in the ancillaries then are class projects and assignments. And, I've tried to be a creative on those, and I know that you're going to add some to those. I've gotten a few from other instructors who have done some of their own projects, and I've put those into that class project section. So there's 24 of those, and for anybody who wants to or has an opportunity to get their students out into the field in some way, these are the things that you can use to do that so that they can take what they're learning in class and carry it with them to their family, to peer groups, to their sport experiences, to watching sport events through the media, and help them, expand those experiences.
So maybe the next question, I guess, to ask is: we talked about how the podcast is a companion to the textbook. How do you see the ancillaries as? And we've sort of addressed this, but more specifically, how do you see the ancillaries as a companion to the textbook? I mean, how might people be using the textbook with the ancillaries?
Yeah, I think my career so far is a half a century of being a teacher, and 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 then we're adding your experiences to that as well. And I know that we agree on this, Jeff, but uh, as we teach, we develop a, a cognitive list of things that we feel would help us during a term. And that's where the ancillaries come from, is that list that you and I have put together over the years of our own experience. And we want to share that with other instructors. Everything in the ancillaries isn't going to resonate in the same way with instructors, but there's plenty there, and hopefully enough will resonate to enable the instructors to save time and to create a more interactional framework within their courses, and to maximize the learning that their students are experiencing in their class. So, just like just like I, over the past 45 years, have changed the book every revision in some significant ways, we're going to continue to do that. So, that's important to have the ancillaries to help the instructors integrate some of that new material into their courses. So we don't want a revision to be a burden. We want it to be a change of pace, an addition, more depth, and more excitement, in a sense, in teaching the course.
Plus the fact that sports are constantly changing, and we are struggling to keep up with the changes that are going on in sports worlds today.
Yeah, let me tell you, I'm just finishing up the chapter on education and sport, and what's going on in colleges right now is a book. And to just do a section on those changes and how those changes are filtering down to the high school level. They're filtered into the minds of parents who are encouraging their kids to do certain things in youth sports. Those changes are massive, and college sports are changing in ways being driven by commercialization. Every day in the newspaper, I read another example of a coach quitting because of the changes, of a coach being poached from another, by another university, uh, to come and be the defensive coordinator because they're desperate to increase the win-loss record and increase revenues and maintain their own salaries. So anyway, I'm not going to get off on that because, there's all sorts of things related to name, image, and likeness, and the portal, and student athletes transferring. So, and the gender chapter is another one that was one of the last ones that I was able to revise, of the ones that I was working on, uh, and just the issues related to trans girls and trans women athletes, from the presidential inaugurational speech to state legislatures passing laws, and coaches facing interactional dynamics that they've never faced before with trans athletes on their teams. That's another book, but it's a major section that's brand new in a sense in that chapter. So there's other examples that I won't go into, but the things driving sport media and climate change issues and so on. We're talking about uh, major challenges for people in sport management and for people in sport organizations.
So hopefully we're able to synthesize all of that material, or at least much of that material, for people teaching sports sociology classes, and save you a lot of time to be able to present it in a powerful and impactful way to your students.
Yeah, and I think that one of the other things that I always have in the back of my head when I'm writing, uh, and I'm sure you do as well, is that we hope that our analysis, which can't be book length, is presented in a way that will spur thoughts by the instructors related to their own experiences and their own perceptions of what's going on in sport, so that it will enable them to incorporate things that they wouldn't have incorporated otherwise into their course.
Yep, absolutely. Well, we should call a stop to this right now and let people get back to their prep work and their classes and grading and whatever it is that they're working on right now. As always, Jay, I really appreciate the conversation.
Yeah, and I appreciate our opportunities to reach out to people who are using the textbook, and if people want to reach back, we're open to that as well. So take care, everyone.